They thought they took everything. My company, my legacy, my only son. They stripped my CEO title and tossed me out like broken furniture. They left me with nothing but the name I was born with. But they forgot one thing: that name was all I ever needed to build it all from the beginning. And it's the only name I'll need to watch it all burn. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old, and until this morning, I was the founder, chief architect, and CEO of Vance and Associates, the largest architectural firm in Portland, Oregon. It was a Tuesday, the kind of grey, drizzling morning that Portland specializes in. I was called into my own boardroom, not for a presentation, but as a summons. The chill in the room had nothing to do with the weather. My son, Julian, sat at the head of the table, in my chair. He was 35, my only child, and he could not meet my eyes. He stared at a sheaf of papers in front of him as if they held the secrets of the universe. And perhaps they did. Beside him, radiating an unnerving level of peace, was his wife, Sabrina. At 32, she was a self-proclaimed life coach and wellness guru. She wore a beige linen ensemble and was calmly rubbing a polished pink rose quartz stone between her thumb and forefinger. She offered me a serene, closed-mouth smile as I entered. "Mom, Eleanor." Julian started. His voice was unsteady, cracking on the first word, before settling into a cold formality. He was reading from a prepared script. "The board has voted. We've decided that the company needs to move in a new, more modern direction." I looked around the table. The other board members, men and women I had known for decades, people I had mentored, whose careers I had built, were all deeply fascinated by their coffee mugs or their notepads. Not a single one would look at me. "A new direction?" I asked. My voice was calm, a sharp contrast to the sudden, icy dread coiling in my stomach. Julian cleared his throat. "We've had to restructure. Your positions, both as CEO and chief architect, have been deemed redundant." Redundant. Me. In the company I had bled for. The word was so sterile, so corporate, so absurd. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table. It stopped inches from my hand. "This is your mandatory retirement package. It's effective immediately." I didn't move. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. This was the boy who used to sleep on a cot under my drafting table. This was the man I had made my partner. "How?" I whispered. He finally looked up. His eyes were flat, empty of the son I knew. "You gave me the shares, Mom. The 51%. The controlling interest I had signed over to him on his 30th birthday. A gesture of absolute trust, a promise of his future. He had just used it as a weapon to end my present." Sabrina leaned forward, her voice a soft, condescending purr. "Eleanor, this isn't a rejection. It's a rebirth. You've worked so hard. Now you can finally rest. We even found a wonderful pottery class for you downtown. It's a great way to channel energy." The door behind me clicked open. I turned. 2 security guards stood there. I didn't recognize their faces. They were new. "You won't be able to return to your office," Julian said, his voice stronger now, bolder. "Your personal effects are being boxed." One of the guards stepped forward, holding a single, small cardboard box. It contained the few items I kept on my desk: a photo of Julian as a child, my favorite fountain pen, a small, worn paperweight. I took the box. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked from Julian to Sabrina, her face a mask of false compassion. I looked at the traitors lining my table. I turned without a word and walked toward the door, the guards flanking me. As I stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the company I had built from nothing, I heard Julian's voice one last time. It was cold, final, and devoid of any emotion. "It's just business, Mum." That cardboard box felt heavier than any set of blueprints. As the elevator doors closed, sealing me off from my life's work, I wasn't in that glass lobby. I was somewhere else entirely. I was back in Detroit, a skinny kid with grease on her hands, watching my father come home from the steel mill. He was a rough man, calloused and quiet, but he had the soul of an artist. He didn't dream of cars. He dreamed of buildings. He kept a beaten-up, old leather sketchbook, and at night, he would draw impossible, beautiful structures that seemed to defy gravity. He'd let me watch, his rough finger tracing a line. "The bones. Ellie." He'd rumble. "A building is only as strong as its bones." He died when I was 16. Cancer from the mill, they said. The last thing he gave me was that sketchbook. His hand was weak, but his grip on mine was tight. "Build something that lasts. Ellie," he whispered. "Something they can't tear down." That promise became my armor. I fought my way into architecture school in the 1980s, a world so thoroughly dominated by men that my presence was seen as a novelty or a threat. I didn't care. I worked twice as hard, learned to drink whiskey neat, and outdrew every single one of them. I met my husband there, a brilliant engineer who saw the art in my math and the math in my art. We were a perfect team. Then, just as we were starting to build our dreams, he was gone. A sudden aneurysm. Julian was only 10 years old. The grief was a void, a collapsing structure. I could have let it swallow me, swallow us. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I built. I founded Vance and Associates a month after the funeral, fueled by grief, terror, and my father's words. I worked day and night, sketching with one hand while holding my sleeping son's hand with the other. Julian grew up on a small cot tucked under my drafting table, the sound of my pencil on vellum his lullaby. He learned to read using blueprints as placemats. My father's sketchbook became my Bible. It was the soul of the company. The kernel of an idea I found in its worn pages, a sketch of a cantilevered roof, became the design for the Kenzie Bridge Tower, the building that won us our first major award and put us on the map. Every intern, every new architect had to see that book. It wasn't just about history. It was about integrity. I built an empire of glass and steel, not just for me, but for Julian. I wanted him to have the legacy my father never could. I wanted him to be secure, to have a foundation that could never crack. That's why I gave it to him. On his 30th birthday, I had the lawyers draw up the papers. 51% of the company, a controlling interest. I thought I was protecting the family legacy, ensuring that the Vance name would mean something for generations. I thought I was giving him a gift. I see now, with the chilling clarity of hindsight, that I wasn't giving him a gift. I was handing him a weapon. I had made the single most fatal mistake of my life. Our bond, Julian's and mine, was forged in late-night work sessions and shared dinners over blueprints. It was the central pillar of my life. It was unbreakable. It was everything. Until Sabrina. He met her at a place called a Mindful Leadership Retreat. When he introduced us, Sabrina described herself not as an architect or a designer, but as a holistic brand strategist. I should have known then. Her entire language was a collection of meaningless, polished stones. She spoke constantly of resonance and high-frequency energy. Her goal, she said, was monetizing authenticity. It sounded expensive and empty, like a beautifully designed box with nothing inside. My first impression of her was overwhelming. She smelled not of anything unpleasant, precisely, but of an oppressive, suffocating cloud of expensive essential oils, patchouli and sandalwood that announced her arrival long before she entered a room. And her smile, it was perfect. A dazzling, straight, white-toothed marvel that never, not once, reached her eyes. It was a mechanical gesture, a tool she used for compliance. She immediately began to consult on Julian's life. It started small. His diet became macrobiotic, then strictly vegan. His wardrobe, once filled with the comfortable, well-worn clothes of a man who actually worked, transformed into a sea of beige and cream-coloured linen. He looked like he was perpetually on his way to a beachside meditation. Then, she began consulting at the firm. She offered her services for free, as a gesture of familial synergy. I watched, appalled, as she suggested a sage smudging ceremony for the server room to clear out the dense digital energy. She wanted to schedule an aura cleansing for the lobby. "Julian," I said one evening, trying to keep my voice reasonable. "Her ideas are abstract, but our work is concrete, literally. We build buildings, not brands." "That's the problem." "Mum," he said, not looking up from his phone, probably reading one of her wellness blogs. "You're stuck in the what. Sabrina is about the why. She's helping us find our authentic narrative." "Our authentic narrative is that we are the best damned architects in the state," I countered. "We don't need to find it. We just need to do the work." She seems far more interested in the press releases than the structural integrity. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were cold. It was a look I had never seen before. "You're just threatened by another strong woman. You don't get her. You're not even trying." That's when the real alarm bells went off. Threatened was her word. Get her was her concept. He was already speaking her language. I did something I'm not proud of, but I was desperate. I called an old friend, a man who runs a private investigation firm. I told him I was just being an overprotective mother, vetting a new partner. I asked him to be discreet. The report came back a week later. It was not a thick file. Sabrina was not from a wealthy California family as she claimed. She was from Reno. Her real name was Jennifer Pritchett, and she had a string of small claims fraud cases filed against her in both Arizona and Nevada, all involving holistic investments and wellness branding that vanished along with the client's money. I felt sick, but I also felt vindicated. I had proof. I waited until Julian and I were alone at the office. I laid the thin folder on his desk. "Julian, honey, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to protect you, to protect us. She is not who she says she is." He opened it. He read the summary page. His face didn't register shock. It hardened into a furious, tight mask. He didn't question the facts. He didn't ask for details. He stood up and slammed the folder shut. "This," he yelled, jabbing a finger at the report. "This is exactly why I need her. You've been trying to control my life since Dad died. You can't stand that I have my own happiness, that I found someone who supports me. Who isn't you?" Julian, that's not true, I pleaded. She's a con artist. Look at the evidence. I don't care about this. He threw the folder across the room. I love her, and you are trying to sabotage me. You can't run my life anymore. Mom. It was the worst fight of our lives. It ended with him storming out, his face purple with rage. He spat the final words at me from the doorway, words that broke a piece of my foundation. She is my family now. A month later, they eloped. After the elopement, Sabrina was no longer just a consultant. Julian, in his first official act as the true power in the company, gave her a formal title, Chief Culture Officer. It was a position she invented, and he approved, complete with a salary I knew had to be astronomical. The changes started small, insidious. The first thing to go was the company logo. For 30 years, it had been a strong, angular representation of the Kenzie Bridge Towers Foundation. Sabrina replaced it. The new logo, unveiled in a company-wide email, was a single, meaningless, beige-coloured circle. She called it a symbol of holistic completion. I called it a donut. Then, she came for my people. Maria, my executive assistant for 20 years, the woman who knew my schedule better than I did, the one who had practically helped raise Julian during those long nights, was fired. The official reason, stated in a memo from Sabrina, was that Maria's anxious energy was disruptive to the office's positive flow. I was furious. I stormed into Julian's office, the one that used to be mine, and found Sabrina there instead, smelling of sandalwood. You can't fire Maria, I said. She is the backbone of this office. Sabrina looked up from her laptop, her smile perfectly in place. Eleanor, we need a team that aligns with our new high-vibration frequency. Maria's energy is very grounded in the past. She's grounded in reality, I shot back. Something this office is suddenly lacking. Mom, Julian said, walking in from a connecting door I'd never seen before, one that now apparently linked his office to his wife's. It's done. It's a culture decision. You need to respect Sabrina's role. The next day, Maria's replacement was in place. A young, cold-eyed man named Leo, who had apparently been Sabrina's personal assistant. He never spoke, just stared at his tablet and seemed to materialize at Sabrina's side whenever she needed him. Sabrina began sitting in on client meetings. This was my domain. But she would interrupt my presentations, questioning my structural choices. Eleanor, that concrete is so harsh, she'd say, turning to the client. Have we considered a wellness-based material instead? Perhaps a compressed bamboo for its grounding properties? The clients, confused, would look at me. I'd explain that bamboo was not suitable for a 50-story skyscraper, but the damage was done. I looked difficult. Mum, you need to be more open-minded, Julian would tell me later, recycling his wife's words. Sabrina is bringing in a fresh perspective. We can't just be about steel and glass anymore. But the real, cancerous decay was happening in the walls, in the conversations I wasn't invited to. I began to feel the isolation, a deliberate severing. Long-time partners, architects I had trained myself, were suddenly reassigned to remote projects or offered lucrative early retirement packages. In their place, new hires appeared young, stylish people who spoke Sabrina's language of synergy and authenticity. I found out later what she was doing. She had started a quiet, brilliant smear campaign. She was telling Julian and the new board members she was helping him appoint that I was losing my edge. that I was stuck. Then came the twist of the knife. A young designer, one of her new hires, presented a concept for a new community centre. It was a near-perfect replica of a design from my father's private sketchbook, one I had been developing myself, before I could speak. Sabrina stood up and praised the young designer for his brilliant, original work. When I confronted her, pointing out the obvious similarities, Sabrina looked at me with wide, wounded eyes. "Eleanor, I can't believe you'd try to steal a junior designer's idea. Are you feeling all right? Julian's been so worried you're showing signs of memory loss." She said it in the open plan office. 3 people heard her. I was completely, utterly alone. The office I had built as a temple of creativity, a place of noise and collaboration and frantic energy, had become a silent, sterile, beige-coloured cult, and I was its heretic. The final move was executed with breathtaking speed and precision. I had been out of the office for 3 days, visiting a difficult site in the mountains, a project I still stubbornly believed I was overseeing. That was all the time they needed. Here is the mechanism of my execution. Sabrina had invented a savior, a massive international wellness corporation based in Zurich called Aura Global. She presented this phantom entity to Julian and to the new, pliable board members she had handpicked. Aura Global, she claimed, was poised to acquire Vance and Associates. The number she dangled was staggering $200 million. But there was a condition. She explained in a private meeting with Julian. A single, small obstacle. The buyers felt the company's brand was stagnant, held back by the old guard and outdated thinking. The deal, she said, was entirely contingent on removing me. I was the bottleneck. I was the past. And they wanted to buy the future. She framed it as an act of mercy. "She'll thank us later? Julian?" I can almost hear her purring, her voice dripping with false empathy. "We're liberating her. Her ego is the only thing standing between us and this deal, between you and your own life. We're setting her free." My son, my Julian, blinded by the fantasy of passive income and seduced by the prospect of finally escaping my shadow, agreed. He saw $200 million. He saw a future where he was the visionary, not just the founder's son. He saw his freedom. The rest was just legal mechanics. They found a loophole in the company bylaws my own lawyer had drafted 20 years ago that allowed for an emergency vote of the board with a majority shareholder's consent, provided the CEO was unavailable. My site visit, my lack of cell service in the mountains, made me unavailable. They held the vote while I was 3 hours away, climbing scaffolding in a hard hat. The new board members, all loyal to Sabrina, voted unanimously. The motion passed. My retirement was mandatory. My career was concluded. When I walked into that boardroom on that rainy Tuesday morning, I was walking into an ambush that had already succeeded. I was the last to know I was dead. The coldness of the act was one thing. The cowardice was another. As I was escorted out of the lobby by the 2 new security guards, my entire life reduced to the contents of a single cardboard box. Leo, Sabrina's silent assistant, approached me. He held out a thin manila envelope. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice as flat and grey as the concrete walls I loved, "asked me to remind you that the company car and company phone must be returned to this office by 5 o'clock this afternoon, or they will be reported as stolen." I stopped. I looked at this boy, this messenger, and the full weight of the betrayal settled. It wasn't just the company. It wasn't just my job. It was this Julian, my son. He hadn't just used the shares I gave him to destroy me. He hadn't just sat there and read from a script to fire me. He had sent an assistant, a stranger, to deliver the final, petty, humiliating threat. He couldn't even do it himself. The lockout was immediate and absolute. By the time I dropped off the company car at 4:45 that afternoon, the keys surrendered to a guard I didn't know my access codes were already deactivated. My email account was gone. My key fob, the one that opened the private garage and the executive elevator, blinked a useless, dull red. My company bank accounts, my expense lines, my digital access to 3 decades of my own work, all frozen. I went home. To the house I designed, a minimalist structure of glass and steel overlooking the Willamette River. It had always been my sanctuary, a place of clean lines and clear thoughts. Now, it was a tomb. The silence was oppressive, suffocating. Every perfectly framed view, every piece of furniture I had chosen with such care, felt like a mockery. I sat in the dark for days, the depression a physical weight, like wet cement setting in my lungs. I tried calling Julian. The first day, the calls rang and rang, finally dumping into a voicemail I knew he would never check. The second day, it didn't even ring. A single, cold, digital beep. He had blocked me. I learned from a small gossip item in the paper that he and Sabrina had just moved into a new luxury penthouse overlooking the city. I called the lawyer who had been with the firm for 30 years, the man who drafted the bylaws. "Frank," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "He locked me out. My own son." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of pity, which was infinitely worse than anger. "Eleanor, I've looked at the minutes from the vote. I'm so sorry. Legally, it's airtight. You gave him the shares, 51%. It was a valid vote. Eleanor, my hands are tied. There's nothing I can do." The silence from the outside world was just as profound. Colleagues I had mentored, partners I had known for decades, even rivals I had shared a mutual respect with, they stopped calling. The narrative had been set. I heard whispers through a former contact who dared to speak to me. Eleanor Vance had suffered a nervous breakdown. She was unwell. Sabrina, in a gesture of profound compassion, had organized a happy retirement to save me from the stress I could no longer handle. The final erasure came a week later, delivered to my doorstep with the morning paper. It was the new issue of Architecture Digest. The cover story, Vance and Associates rebrands, Julian Vance and Sabrina Vance lead the new wave of holistic design. And there it was, a full-page, glossy photograph. Sabrina. She was sitting at my desk, the one my husband had custom built for me from reclaimed timber. She was sitting in my Eames chair, her legs crossed, smiling that vacant, perfect smile at the camera, as if she owned the world I had built. I felt myself disappearing. I hadn't just been fired, I had been erased. I was staring at that magazine, the pages blurring, when my doorbell rang. I hadn't heard that sound in what felt like a lifetime. I opened it. Maria stood on my doorstep, clutching a rain-soaked umbrella. My assistant for 20 years. The one Sabrina had fired for disrupting the flow. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice low and urgent. She looked terrified, but also furious. "I'm sorry to bother you. I never trusted them. Not for a minute. Maria, I whispered. Come in. Come in. She stepped inside but shook her head, pulling something from her handbag. It was a slim, portable hard drive. I couldn't just leave. Mrs. Vance? After 20 years, I knew where all the files were. When she fired me, I backed up the executive server. I kept copies. I thought they were just being cruel. But it's worse. She held out the drive, her small hand trembling. They aren't just rebranding, ma'am, Maria said, her eyes meeting mine, dark with conviction. They're liquidating. That hard drive clicked into my personal workstation, and the depression that had fogged my world for weeks vanished. It was replaced by a cold, structural fury. Maria stood over my shoulder, her finger pointing at the screen. I backed up the executive servers, Mrs. Vance, but also the encrypted finance drives, she said, her voice a low whisper. She and that. Leo? They thought I was just a receptionist. They didn't know I managed the network security protocols for the first 10 years we were in business. We didn't talk. We just worked. The sound in my glass house was no longer silence. It was the sharp, precise clicking of keys. The first lie materialized in less than 20 minutes. Aura Global. The $200 million acquisition that had justified my execution. I searched every server, every correspondence log, every external email record. Nothing. The name Aura Global did not exist in any communication to or from an outside entity. It only existed in internal memos, drafted by Sabrina and sent to Julian and the new board members. It was a ghost, a fabrication, a lie so audacious, so utterly baseless, that no one would ever think to question it. The $200 million savior was a phantom, invented for one purpose, to give my son the excuse he needed. So if they aren't selling the company? I murmured, my mind racing. They're selling from the company, Maria said, pulling up a different folder. Look, wire transfers. The real plan was infinitely more parasitic. It wasn't an acquisition. It was a hostile liquidation, an inside job. And the ringleader wasn't just Sabrina. It was Leo. Her assistant was, in fact, her primary financial partner, and, as a few buried hotel receipts suggested, her lover. They were systematically gutting Vance and Associates from the inside out. First, the intellectual property. We found the contracts. My designs, my award-winning blueprints, the entire digital archive of my life's work. They were being sold for pennies on the dollar to a cut-rate development competitor in Dubai, a company I had beaten in bidding wars for a decade. They were selling the very soul of the firm. Second, the physical assets. While Sabrina distracted everyone with holistic branding, Leo was busy with the banks. We found the loan applications. They were mortgaging the company's properties to the hilt, including our flagship office building, a building I had paid for in cash, and pulling out millions in debt. The endgame was horrifyingly clear. They would spend the next 6 months siphoning every last drop of cash and liquidating every valuable asset. They would load the corporate shell, the Vance name, with so much debt it would collapse. Then, just before the bankruptcy was declared, they would disappear. Maria found the final file, a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, registered to Leo, and 2 one-way flight itineraries booked for 6 months from now. And Julian, my son Maria, pulled up his official company calendar. He was a pawn, and a pathetically easy one to manage. While they were busy auctioning off his inheritance, he was the face of the brand. He was giving interviews to wellness blogs. He was flying. company funded, to leadership summits in Bali. He was so drunk on his own press releases, so high on the validation of being the visionary who had finally escaped his mother's shadow. He hadn't bothered to read a single financial statement. He was the puppet CEO, happily signing off on the theft, believing he was building a new legacy. I finally understood. They didn't just get rid of me. They had to get rid of me. I would have seen the structural flaw in their plan in a single day. I would have recognized the Dubai firm's name. I would have questioned the loans. This wasn't a retirement. It was the necessary demolition of the building's only load-bearing wall before they could bring the whole thing down. They had to destroy my reputation first, to make me look unstable, senile, irrelevant. So when it all fell apart, the blame would land on me. I looked at the invitation still sitting on my counter. The upcoming 30th anniversary gala. It wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. Maria found the event's running order. Sabrina was the keynote speaker. Her speech was titled, "Announcing Our New Global Partnership." It was her coming out party, the moment she would publicly announce the Dubai sale, the final, triumphant looting. I stood up from the computer. The heavy, damp wool blanket of my depression evaporated in an instant, replaced by something clean, cold, and forged. It was rage, a precise, architectural rage. "She wants a stage," I said, my voice quiet, unfamiliar to my own ears. I looked at the glossy gala invitation on my counter. "She wants to be the keynote speaker." Maria looked at me, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Vance." "She can have her stage," I said. "I will build it for her, and I will design it to collapse." The fog was gone. I picked up my personal phone and began to make calls, not to friends, not to allies, but to sharks. My first call was to a rival at a competing firm, a man I had beaten for the museum contract 10 years prior. "Robert," I said. "Eleanor Vance. I have 2 guest tickets for the Vance and Associates 30th anniversary gala. I highly suggest you attend. It's going to be an education in corporate finance." My second call was to the most ruthless investigative business reporter at the Oregonian. "David, I'm inviting you to a party. I won't give you a quote. I'll give you a front row seat. I promise you. This will be the story of the year. Just bring a camera." My third call was to Arthur, the quiet accountant, the single no vote on the board, the only one who hadn't been replaced by one of Sabrina's sycophants. "Arthur," I said, "I have the data. I'm going to need you." He didn't hesitate. "I'm in. Eleanor, what do you need?" With Maria's help, and using the last of my liquid personal funds, I hired a private forensic accounting firm, not a big one, but a small, hungry, vicious team known for finding skeletons. I gave them Maria's hard drive and one instruction: follow the money and do it fast. They took 48 hours. The report they delivered was a masterpiece of financial evisceration. They confirmed every transfer to the Cayman Shell Company, registered to Leo Stanton. They found the encrypted emails, the ones where Sabrina and Leo mocked Julian, calling him the golden child and the pretty face. But the real bombshell was the Dubai deal. The forensic team found the master contract. I looked at the CEO's name, Sheikh Al-Jamil. I didn't hand the information to a lawyer. I handled it myself. It took 6 hours to get past his gatekeepers. When his voice finally came on the line, deep and wary, I was calm. "Sheikh Al-Jamil," I said. "This is Eleanor Vance. I am the founder and the chief architect of the firm you are currently in business with." "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice cold. I was told you were unwell, retired. We are dealing with Mrs. Sabrina Vance. I'm sure you are, I said. I'm calling as a professional courtesy. The designs you purchased a license for the Kenzie Tower specifications. The St. Jude's Hospital wing. Did she inform you that she was also selling the exact same exclusive license to two other firms in Singapore and Berlin? There was a dead silence on the line. And, I continued, did she also inform you that those designs are stolen intellectual property, which she has no legal right to sell, license, or even possess? I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a low, furious string of Arabic. When he spoke again, his voice was lethal. She has implicated my company in a fraud. She has, I agreed. And she is planning to announce your partnership at a public gala in 3 days. I imagine that would be quite embarrassing for you. I have a ticket for you, if you'd care to join me. You can discuss the terms of your agreement with her in person. I will be on the next flight, he said, and the line went dead. The trap was almost set. Arthur, Maria, and I worked to compile the evidence into a single, devastating presentation. The wire transfers, the emails, the proof of the multiple exclusive sales. But I needed one more thing. The linchpin. The physical proof of origin. The designs she was selling all stemmed from one source. My father's sketchbook. It was still in my office. Her office. It was the one thing the hard drive couldn't give me. She changed the locks. Mrs. Vance, Maria said. The executive floor is keyed separately now. I know, I said. But she didn't fire Carlos. Carlos was the head of the night shift custodial crew, 15 years ago. His wife had been in a bad accident. The company insurance wouldn't cover the experimental surgery. I had paid for it. Maria met him in a cafe. He didn't just give her a master key card. He gave her the new security patrol routes and the blind spots in the camera system. At 2 a.m, I walked back into the lobby of Vance and Associates. The sterile, beige walls and the lingering scent of sandalwood made my stomach turn. I swiped the card. I took the service elevator. The building I knew better than my own home was silent. I slid the card into the lock of my old office. The door clicked open. She had redecorated. Of course. Everything was beige or cream, but she had kept my desk. And on the corner of it, displayed like a trophy she thought she had won, was my father's worn, leather-bound sketchbook. I picked it up. The leather was cool in my hand. I held it against my chest. The architect was back, and this time, I was designing a demolition. The 30th anniversary gala was held at the Portland Art Museum in the Grand Kellen White Ballroom. It was a space I knew well. I had designed the new acoustic wing 10 years prior. The room was dripping with tasteful, expensive opulence. Sabrina's holistic brand was on full display, massive arrangements of white orchids and pampas grass, beige-coloured mood lighting, and the faint, sickening scent of sandalwood pumped through the vents. The room was packed. The absolute elite of Portland were there, sipping champagne, and, scattered among them, looking slightly out of place with their notepads and sharp eyes, were the 2 investigative journalists I had personally invited. My old rival, Robert, was standing by the bar, watching the scene with a predatory interest. In the back, near the sound booth, stood Arthur, looking nervous in his best suit, and in a quiet, shadowed alcove, a very tall, very imposing Sheikh Al-Jamil stood with 2 men, his face a mask of stone-cold fury. Then, the lights dimmed, and the main act began. Sabrina emerged to a swell of soft, synthesized music. She was breathtaking in a custom-designed, flowing silk gown, the color of course, beige. The dress must have cost the company a fortune. Julian was beside her, looking handsome and polished in a new tuxedo, but his eyes were vacant. He was a perfect, beautiful, empty accessory to his wife's triumph. She glided onto the stage, took the microphone, and beamed that perfect, mechanical smile. "We are here tonight," she began, her voice a soft, hypnotic purr, "to honor the future, to honor the evolution of Vance and Associates." She spoke for 10 minutes, a masterpiece of meaningless corporate jargon. She talked about shedding the old skin, embracing a new vibrational frequency, and aligning our brand's synergy. It was a speech about everything and nothing. I watched from the lobby on a monitor, my father's sketchbook clutched in my hand. Arthur, in the sound booth, gave me a signal. He had control of the main presentation screens. Sabrina was building to her climax. And that is why I am so thrilled to announce a new era, a new... On cue, the main ballroom doors swung open. A sudden, sharp beam of light from the lobby cut through the dim, beige-tinted atmosphere. The music faltered. Every head in the room turned. I stepped through the doors. I was not wearing a gown. I was wearing a perfectly tailored, razor-sharp black pantsuit. I was wearing my armor. My hair was pulled back tight, and I was not smiling. I looked, I am sure, like a general arriving to survey a battlefield. A single, collective gasp, then a wave of whispers, rolled through the crowd. On stage. Sabrina's smile froze. Her hand, holding the microphone, began to tremble. Julian saw me. His face, once blank, flushed with a dark, petulant anger. He stepped forward. Mum, what are you doing here? You are not invited, security." I ignored the 2 guards who began to move toward me. I walked calmly, my heels clicking with a sharp, steady rhythm on the marble floor. I walked directly toward the stage, my eyes locked on hers. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up at my son and his wife. I held up the worn, leather-bound sketchbook for the entire room to see. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice clear, cold, and amplified by the silence of 100 stunned guests. "I'm not here to celebrate the future. I'm here to save the past." Security. Sabrina shrieked. Her voice, usually a soft, calculated purr, cracked high and ugly. "Security. Get her out of here, get her out." The new guards started to move, but they were hesitant, looking at Julian, then at me, their authority suddenly in question. It didn't matter. I walked past them, stepped onto the low secondary platform, and took the second microphone. Arthur, in the control booth, had already switched the audio feed. My voice was the only one that would be heard. 30 years ago, I said, my voice echoing, sharp and clear, in the suddenly silent ballroom. I founded this company on a single principle: integrity. A principle, Sabrina, that you are fundamentally incapable of understanding. She tried to laugh, a panicked, glassy sound. She's rambling. Eleanor, you're upset. We understand. You're senile. I am not senile, I said, turning my gaze to my son. Julian, look at me. She lied to you. There is no Aura Global. There is no $200 million acquisition. It was a phantom, A story she invented to convince you to discard me, so she could begin to steal? Mum? What? What are you talking about? Julian stammered, his face pale. I'm talking, I said, about the truth. As I spoke, the massive presentation screens behind Sabrina, the ones queued up with her holistic synergy video, flickered. Then they switched. Arthur's timing was perfect. The first image was a bank statement, a wire transfer for $2 million from the Vance and Associates operating account to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a company registered to Leo Stanton. A collective gasp swept the room. The journalists I had invited were no longer seated. They were at the foot of the stage, their phones and cameras held high, recording everything. The screen changed again. An email. From Sabrina's personal account to Leo's. The golden child is on his way to Bali. He'll be gone 10 days. We can finalize the Dubai sale and the next loan. He's too busy enjoying the brand to ever check the books. She didn't rebrand this company. Julian? I said, my voice cutting through the rising murmur. She liquidated it. She sold 30 years of our work, to a competitor in Dubai. She stole our intellectual property, mortgaged our buildings, and planned to leave you holding the bag for a bankrupt, hollowed-out shell. No, Julian whispered, shaking his head. No. And this, I said, my voice dropping. I held up my father's sketchbook. She didn't just sell our future, Julian. She sold our past. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I let it unfurl. This is an appraisal. From a local auction house. She was going to sell my father's soul, this sketchbook, as a vintage office curio. Estimated value $500. That was the blow that finally landed. Not the millions in theft, but the sheer, petty, desecrating insult of it. Julian's head snapped toward his wife. His face, once pale with confusion, was now purple with a dawning, volcanic rage. You were selling. You told me. You told me it was just old junk. You said you were clearing the clutter. Sabrina was trapped. Her beige mask of serenity had cracked and fallen away, revealing the cheap, terrified fraud underneath. Julian, baby, listen to me. She's lying. But her voice was cut off. The ballroom doors opened again. This time, it wasn't me. It was 2 uniformed police officers, and walking between them, his face a mask of thunder, was Sheikh Al-Jamil. The sheikh raised one long, authoritative finger and pointed directly at the woman on the stage. That is her, he boomed. That is the thief who sold me stolen property. The officers walked directly to the stage. Sabrina backed away, stumbling on the hem of her custom gown. Sabrina Duval, one of the officers said, his voice hard as he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Also known as Jennifer Pritchett, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand intellectual property theft. The room exploded in a blinding storm of camera flashes. They illuminated the single, final image of the night Sabrina, her face a grotesque mask of shock, being pulled away in handcuffs, and Julian, standing alone on the stage, frozen. A hollow man, standing in the wreckage of the legacy he had just helped destroy. I stood there, silent, my hand gripping my father's sketchbook. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I want to know what you think, so please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. To join our family and hear more stories like this one. Make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.